This is the Vision 79 podcast, where my friend Sander and myself, Mason, discuss recent developments in our business and personal growth. The name Vision 79 comes from our respective racing numbers. Sander's is 40, mine is 39, and we have a shared vision for success in business and our personal lives. Many successful people have started small, just like us, but very few of them have documented their early years. They often say they wish they had, and given we believe in learning lessons from others, we intend to be the first to document our journey from start to finish. Today, we'll discuss the pros and cons of going to college, what alternate paths there are for those who think college is a scam, what our experience with college has been, whether we think it's a scam, and much more. But first, I want to thank our official anti-sponsor of the podcast, which is Celsius, because we don't take any sponsors. And so instead of getting money from Celsius, I spend all my money on Celsius. And Red Bull.
Yes, and Red Bull.
Dude, I might have to stop drinking Red Bull if Max Verstappen goes to Aston Martin.
Should they make an Aston Martin drink?
They're going to have to, dude. What am I going to drink? I think Celsius sponsors Ferrari, actually, which is not fantastic because now I'm a Ferrari fan.
Maybe the Aston Martin drink will be flavored as electrical problems and leaking oil.
Not their Formula One drinks. Their Formula One drinks will taste like nepotism and tears. Anyways, we started each podcast with a little update on where we're at in our business and personal lives so that when we look back on this in the future, we roughly know where we are at in our development. What do you have for business? What do you have for your podcast sheet today?
Nothing. No podcast sheet.
Well, what have you done this week for business?
For business this week. So this is about a week and a half now-ish because of these weird times that we're recording because of the Rolex.
I think so.
Right. So last week, I was working on some product sourcing, working with the ad account, also working on podcast upload stuff, working on acquiring that extra dropshipping business that I talked about in the previous podcast. And then we had the Rolex. We'll go into that on the personal notes. But then this week, almost complete with the acquisition of that separate business. Today was the first day with me running it in my name, besides the ad account, which he still has to transfer over, but the ad account is funded. So I'm getting sales and money flow coming in. Today is the first day of that. Just working on sprucing a few things up on the store and the Gmail and the social media, just tidying it up a little bit, making it a little bit nicer. I'm also going to be working on revising the advertisements that he currently has for that product. And then also I got my ad account fixed for my original dropshipping store. So I'm going to be running an engagement campaign on that tonight. So just a dizzy wealth of drop shipping related stuff, a very brief summary of a lot of different buttons to push, essentially.
Cool.
So all going well on that front, and then just didn't prepare for this podcast at all, to be honest. It's been slammed.
We got this room.
Sorry. Fucking Beavis over there interrupted us.
It's Tweedledee and Tweedledipshit students at Fordham.
I actually recognize him.
Really?
Yeah.
Who is he?
Fucking, he was Beavis, that's for sure. He wasn't the
We're in a
little box. No.
Was he in our grade, like our class?
Probably.
What do you know?
Probably got held up because he was so fucking stupid.
What was he? What class? Were we in a class together?
I don't remember.
All right.
Did I ever graduate?
I don't know.
Anyways, yeah.
I didn't see his face, so I don't know.
All in all, those are the business updates. But what about you? What do you have for business?
I'm in unit 18 of 19 for my real estate course. I'm almost done. I'm at 218 pages of notes. So when I think about how Grace and Tyler went through the 2-week in-person training course, it's 2 weeks. It's like 8 hours a day. So it's like 60 something hours total. I think to myself, there's no way they wrote fucking 200 pages of notes in that whole time. So I'm definitely taking way longer with it than the in-person course, but hopefully that means I pass my test the first time because I'm a fucking terrible test taker. So at least I think I'm retaining the information. And I got approval today. I had to send fingerprints in for a background check to get clearance to take the state licensing exam, and I got approval today. So
Okay.
if I hypothetically, if I finish my course tonight and take the course exam tonight, I could schedule my state exam for tomorrow and then have my license on Saturday. But that probably won't happen. I'll probably take some time to review because I've been through the course once and I have 200 pages of notes. But if you think you're going to remember all 200 pages the first time, you're crazy. So I'll probably go back through and I'll take practice exams. But generally speaking, it's good. I'm having a lot of conversations with Tyler as I get ramped up into this. It's really awesome because Grace is going through her first few deals right now and dealing with like the worst clients to ever live. Or one of her clients is basically my mom. So she's like the most difficult person to appease, and she has to appease her. So it's interesting watching her do all the problem solving, and then at the same time getting advice from Tyler, who's also transitioning back into real estate full time. And then talking to Tyler about doing business together once I get my license. He wants me to work at Blue Marlin. But like every night there's like a 2-hour conversation just about like whatever's going on. And it's so captivating and I'm so excited about it. It's like I'm stoked and I'm fucking pissed that getting there is taking so long, but I'm happy because I know that I'm on the way and I'm retaining everything. We have had the same conversation twice, you know?
Yeah.
So everything that I'm picking up, I'm taking with me instead of forgetting it immediately.
Right.
Yeah.
I gotcha.
So that's my business update.
Cool. Very nice. My personal update is I'll save the rolls for last so we could talk about that together in conjunction.
That's the only thing I have.
Oh, got it. Okay. So then we'll just dive right into that after. But personal life, actually, I'm trying to think. Oh, I guess I'll say work has been very busy. I worked an 11.5-hour shift, not including my drive time yesterday.
That's terrible.
Scrumptious.
Well, that's your personal life. That's your personal life update.
Yeah. Well, it's not business, so I guess it has to fall under personal, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It makes
So,
sense.
but I'm trying to solve their this issue they're having with parts tags, which is essentially like a fancy way to say tracking parts.
Yeah.
And so
There's a lot of
I'm
cheesy
trying to
work,
I have a lot of meetings with like different managers and people higher up, and there's like a group of people that like want to incentivize it to change it, and then there's another group of people that just like want to force it upon people and be like, it's your job, do it. And I'm like, you've tried that before. You tried that in 2023. How well did it work out for you?
Yeah.
Because the problem still exists today. So maybe just like telling them to do it more isn't actually going to solve the problem if you already tried that 2 years ago and you're still having the same problem. But
I heard this interesting tidbit about DeepSeek today, the Chinese AI, which is their employees are largely new graduates. Like they have less than 2 years of experience in the field. And it's because the guy wants to hire someone with no experience, because if he hires someone with experience, they have a way of solving problems, and that's the way to solve the problems. But if you get someone new, even if they have less technical knowledge, they have a different idea about how to attack the problem.
Right. Right.
Which is interesting.
I think there's a lot of underlying issues in the approach to solving problems at NASA. I think it's a lot of what you're talking about, and then a lot of like flawed and older systems that are just outdated, and there isn't a proper allocation of funding in order to solve them, and blah, blah, blah. But anyways, that's a whole nother spiel. But in terms of personal life stuff, not much. Not much. I've been slammed. I was up really late last night doing all this drop shipping stuff on calls with the guy in Australia. And then I got up really early today, and then I worked straight through all today. And yeah, I'm tired.
Yeah,
I'm tired.
Me too. I've been doing really well with my bedtime at like getting to sleep before midnight.
So bad the last few days.
Last night, dude, I had a great conversation with Tyler, because Tyler was like, he was like, I want to stick you on FSBOs, which is for sale by owners. Like, I want to give you a list of phone numbers and then have you just go fucking bananas for like 3 weeks and get crazy like clients. And I was super amped up. And he was like, I'm going back to real estate full-time February 18th. And I was like, I will have my license February 18th. And he was like, sweet, let's do it. So I got amped, and then I worked until like 2 last night. So I fucked it up. But yeah, the only night that I fucked up in like the last 3 weeks, apart from Daytona.
Actually, that's not really true for me. I've been really slammed lately at work, and so it's been really tough.
Yeah. I had an interesting conversation with Christian and Joel at the bar the other day. I was talking about how I have not been able to sleep and recover the way I did at Daytona in a long time. Because for the Daytona, I slept 2 hours, and I haven't been able to have a day, sleep 2 hours, and then have another day, and then sleep regular, and then have another day after that, since like my sophomore year of college, which is when I got the COVID vaccine. And like, there's a very clear mark when I got the COVID vaccine that before it, I was able to do sleep runs like that. And then after that, I just wasn't able to. Like, I needed a minimum of like 8 hours, or I was not functioning well. And I would operate on less than that, but I wouldn't function very well. I'd have a lot of caffeine and I felt like shit. But Christian and I were talking at the bar, and he was saying, dude, I get that way if I drink Kratom too close to going to bed. And I was like, really? And Joel was like, yeah, I'm the same way too.
I was there for this conversation.
Were you?
Yeah, Joel was talking about his bedtimes for Kratom, like not doing it 1 hour before.
Oh, okay. I didn't think you were there for this. This was during the day. This was Monday. No, you weren't there.
We
You went to work
had
on
a
Monday.
conversation twice because I know we talked about it with Joel. Maybe we talked about it at Daytona a little bit.
We might have talked about it with Joel at the Daytona, but this was afterward because I felt great on Monday and I had skipped work on Monday. And this is when I was talking to Joel during the day. But Christian was like, yeah, I drink kratom in the morning to wake up and then kava in the evening to like kind of vibe. And I was like, oh, well, I wake up in the morning and drink kratom because I have to go to work. And then after work, I go to the gym, so I have caffeine. And then I go back to work at the bar, and so I have more kratom. And then I force myself to go to sleep with melatonin. So it's like I'm balancing the different fucking concoctions to make it work. But I didn't have really any tea when we went to Daytona because I had so many Lolos, I was afraid I'd get sick. So I'm wondering, oh, I wonder if I'm drinking kratom too late in the evening. And I thought about it and I was like, well, that's not going to change because I need to get my real estate work done at some point, and it's going to be in the middle of the night because I have a 9 to 5. But it would be really awesome if I didn't have that 9 to 5 and I could stop drinking kratom at like 8 p.m. so that I could get to bed at a reasonable time.
After I quit kratom, there was a period of time where I was definitely like very groggy going into the night, but that faded away after about 3 weeks, and I sleep and wake up much better than I used to.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've determined that in order to sleep better.
But it's tough because there's no good time to quit because it's essentially like 2 weeks of just like fucking your work ethic is just like plummeted. At least for me it was, but I've been drinking a lot longer. I don't know how.
Well, I also wouldn't be quitting. I'd just be like skewing it earlier in the day.
Yeah.
It's just not drinking it so close to going to sleep.
Right.
But right now, the only available work slot I have to work is right before I go to sleep, and I need to be alert for that. So I drink kratom and then shut my brain down with melatonin.
Yeah.
So anyways, the only update I have is the Daytona.
Yeah. Daytona was super fun. We got there around 8 a.m. Went to sign the start-finish line, walk around the grid, watch the cars go around, had dinner at Applebee's, slept in the cars, got up, watched the sunrise from the bleachers, chilled a little bit more, watched the awards ceremony, went to drink Cabo Bar in Daytona, and then went on back home. So
Dude, this was easily, I think, hands down my favorite Daytona trip that we've had.
yeah,
And I
so
think
too.
a huge part of it has to do with how awake I felt throughout the weekend.
Yeah.
And I think a huge part of that is sleep preparedness, because last year I don't think I did a bunch of sleeping in the week leading up to it. But I did this year. And then honestly, I think the kratom and kava helped a lot because this was my first year having either of those really. I took like, you brought some last time, but I didn't really drink a whole lot of it last time and I was tired. But I think it made a fucking huge difference.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, my key lessons learned, I think. I brought an extra, it was cold this year, so we had to pack layers. But I brought an empty backpack with me to wear on my back to walk around so that as I took my layers off, I could put it in the backpack and keep my drinks with me and stuff, no problem.
Yeah.
That was awesome. I bought gloves, which was sweet because it was super cold and hot hands. And the lesson that I didn't learn this year that I should have, when you were sending your email to everybody, the email out to everybody, telling them what to expect and what to bring, I edited it and said, bring sunscreen. And then I didn't. So I got sunburned. And then my dad fortunately brought sunscreen. So I applied it the next day. But for next year, I think the biggest takeaway I have is to bring sunscreen.
Yeah. I put sunscreen on. I did much better this year in terms of burn.
Yeah.
So usually I get a lot more burn this year when it's not too bad.
Yeah.
So that was good. But I'm ready to dive into the podcast topic that I'm very well prepared for.
All right. Sounds good.
So go for it.
So I'm restructuring this a little bit because usually we'll do like an intro section. Instead, I just have a clip to read for the intro and then we'll go straight into the first segment.
Cool.
So college costs a ton of money. It takes 4 years of your life, and then it doesn't even guarantee you a job. You then drown in student loans or don't, depending on your situation, for the next decade of your life. And that kind of sounds like a scam, doesn't it? Is this always the case? Surely some degrees suffer less than others. Which ones do, which ones don't? Why is this the case? Student loans should be lowered or should they be eradicated? With the rise of skilled trades, techs, boot camps, and entrepreneurship, is traditional education still necessary? So for the first segment, I just want to like stories aside, just list out what are the like concrete pros and cons of college degrees and college.
Pros, I'd say that it gives you an education. It gives you access to connections with different companies or internships that could potentially get you a job at a company that you like or are interested in.
That's a good one.
It gets you in contact with like-minded people that you could potentially go on to build something with. It gets you interested about a variety of different scientific, or at least I'm thinking STEM, mathematical and scientific studies, and broadens your horizon in terms of your understanding of the world around you. It's a great place to learn how to socialize and network and connect with different people. And a degree can be helpful in certain jobs and with certain positions. And college is the only real way to get a degree like that.
It's interesting that a lot of your points are based around I only have 3, but it's interesting because none of mine are structured around the social aspect of it. But meeting people and getting connections is huge, and I hadn't even considered it because a lot of people get their internships or, like, ins in companies while they're in
Yeah.
college, or even, like,
I think it's a network vehicle more than anything.
yeah, like Steve Jobs and, Steve Wozniak met in college, I think, and then they went on to found Apple together. So even if you don't go to work at a company together or, like, get something, you make connections that can come back later in life.
Yep.
So, like, the kids you graduate with, if you end up working at the same company as them, scratch each other's backs as you climb the corporate ladder. Um, my list is that students learn the fundamentals and potentially mastery of topics of interest, which you wouldn't get otherwise. So, like, just to preface, I feel like a lot of people rag on college because it's like, oh, well, they don't really teach you a whole ton. A lot of people come out of it with like imposter syndrome. But I don't think that's really the case because, especially from my experience, like, I don't think I could have learned everything that I learned about engineering from YouTube. You know,
Yeah.
like, I think in order to get to where I am now, I would need some sort of formal education, whether it costs money or not.
Yeah. I think they teach a lot, but it's up to the student to learn a lot,
Yeah, exactly.
you know?
I think if the knowledge obtained sufficiently prepares you for work in that field, even if you come into it and you feel like you don't know what's going on, like you feel like you have some imposter syndrome, it's likely just that it's because you're in a new company and you would have that even if you switch companies after a few years of experience, because everyone does it
Yeah.
a little bit differently. But if you took senior of high school Mason and senior of college Mason and placed them both in the job that I have now, senior in college Mason would do way better because senior in high school Mason doesn't even know the fucking terminology that's going on around here.
Yeah.
Right? I wish I could talk about specifics, but you feel what I mean, right? And then my last pro is that it provides a gradual shift from dependence to independence. So, like,
Mm.
the phase that think about a kid who's at the end of high school who actually there's a really great example of this because one of my friends, he graduated high school, he had great grades and just didn't want to go to college, so he started welding because he wanted to be a welder. And then I went to college. And so he went from you don't pay for anything, you live at home, and like after school every day you like go play sports and then go home to okay, now I wake up at 7 a.m. and I go to work every day and it's physical work. And then at the end of the day, like you can go out drinking, but you can't spend all your money because you have bills to pay. And that was a really hard transition for him, like right away. But he was making like $45,000 a year, which when you're making zero money in high school, that's like really good money.
Yeah.
And then I went on to college where like I have to pay for some things. Like now I'm paying for gas and like maybe car insurance or something, but like I'm not paying for my food or rent or anything like that. But I'm also not making any money. I'll make money over the summer and then it lasts me throughout the year.
Right.
But it's a much more gradual incline because it's like, okay, well, yeah, you're making 45K now, but when I graduate in 4 years, I'll be making whatever, 70K. And that doesn't hold water while you're out at a bar and he's buying you drinks because he's the one with the income. But it is a much more gradual shift that I think ultimately leads to maybe more, it's hard to quantify, more mentally healthy people in adulthood. Would you say that too?
College leads to people being more uh, mentally happy with their lives. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I'm trying to figure it out because it's like I feel that if you have a slower transition from being dependent to being independent, if you can slow that transition down, you're more well equipped to be successful once you're independent than if it's a super sharp shift and like if your parent kicks you out when you're 16 years old and you have to go figure out how to live.
Potentially. I kind of see it in a different way in that um, college builds you a safety net.
Mhm.
Your safety net's relatively thin when you come out of high school. And that can be really good or really bad. It can be really bad because you can just fall straight through it. Or it can be really good because if you're hands-on and tactical and driven, then you can figure out how to build a really efficient net really quickly.
Mhm.
Right? College builds a medium net slowly. And so I think there's an aspect of when people get out of college, they have a good net, they have a good safety net. And so they don't really see the need to build it farther. Right?
Okay.
And so it's like I think that college can be good for getting you to a spot where you are safe and comfortable enough to live a decent and traditionally normal life.
Mhm.
And I think that that kind of normalcy, is that a word?
Sure.
Is good for a lot of people, because they don't want to have, the risky situations where they don't know if what they're going to do is going to work out, like business. They don't want to have the situations where they're wondering if they're going to have their job, next month, because they want something stable for 20 years that's a government position or a DoD position or whatever, right? So there is a benefit to the safety net, but I also think that the safety net in a way can be a poison too, right? Because it can whittle down great minds into just being complacent and feeling like this is good enough, why try more? When there's a lot of great untapped minds, I think, out there that kind of go through that college process and have that sort of transition and see themselves kind of settling into it, and then they kind of get comfortable, right?
I guess
where like there's a lot of great minds out there that kind of settle in that may not have settled into that and become greater versions of themselves if they were just thrown into the deep end.
I think we might be talking about different things.
Okay.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, you're taking it from the perspective of like career success, right? Like more long term. I'm talking more short term. Like here's an example, right? So when I graduated college, in like my last like 5 months of school, I needed to borrow money from my parents to buy racing gear, this stuff, right?
Sure.
So I borrowed $3,000 from my parents because I was like, dude, that's like one paycheck at Northrop. It's fine. I'll pay it off immediately. And then I graduated and I was like, oh, okay, I have a lot of expenses now out of nowhere. And my paycheck isn't $3,000. It's like $2,000 because of taxes. So I don't actually have the ability to pay it off all at once. Fuck. But I had the leniency of still graduating college and having some time to figure out that $3,000 is actually way more money than you think it is. And that grocery bills cost more, and like meal prepping takes a lot of time. And you have more time over the course of your 4 years in college to learn that than if you're just dumped on your head straight out of high school. So like the people who I know who graduated high school and then immediately worked at like Publix, like bagging groceries, right? Life hits you really fucking hard, really fucking fast. And I feel that people who graduate high school and then immediately take a job at a gas station are less concerned with increasing your income and like having a savings account and like stuff like that. And they're more so like living paycheck to paycheck. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel that having a slower transition into, hey, here's a little bit more money than you're used to, but also here's a little bit more expenses than you're used to, kind of get a feeling for what that's like. Again, it's
I agree completely.
that's strictly what I'm talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I'm trying to add on to it. I don't know if I'm conveying myself clearly. But what I'm saying is that I agree that the sharp transition of not going to college can be very jarring.
Mm-hmm.
And short term, that can be very challenging for people to get through.
Yeah.
At the same time, I see the potential for strong-minded people to get through that potentially better and achieve more, now I'm talking long-term, I guess, than someone who goes to college. Someone who goes to college has a higher probability to kind of sit in that boat. And although it might be better mental health wise in the short term saying like 4 or 5 years, right? Than the time that you're in college and then transition versus the 4 or 5 years you might just be working a job out of high school. Like those, maybe your mental health is better through college. I mean, there's an argument that college can be really stressful, especially if you have a STEM degree.
It's not as stressful as not having money to pay rent a month and a half after graduating high school.
Yeah.
Right.
But I see your point. I think it will probably get into the long-term stuff later on in the podcast too.
Yeah.
But
those are the pros that I had.
Yeah, I hear that.
In conclusion. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now cons. What are your cons?
So I'd say I dived into a little bit in our last section in terms of cons. But I think that college and potentially even 9 to 5s, although that's a different discussion, but similarly, college can kind of get you complacent with the way your life is because you're surrounded by people who are all driven towards the same exact thing. And your entire influence in your community is having the same goal of graduating, getting their degree, getting a good paying job, getting a stable house eventually with a mortgage, with a wife and kids, and then, doing that. And I think that's a very honorable way to live. I think that's if that's the life you want to live, 100% go for it. I think there's a lot of honor in that. I think that's wonderful. And if you can grow yourself in that environment, then that's great. I know that I personally cannot grow myself as effectively in that environment, which is why I seek to do something different. In my view, it's something more ambitious right? But that may be just my perspective, right?
Right.
I think that the biggest con of college is that it gets you into the mindset of like, this is the way life is, this is how you live, and this is how you do things, right? And I think that kind of bleeds into a variety of factors. It bleeds into one factor of it may not get you to think about how you can have a greater impact on the world, right? Because you may think, oh, well, I just do a 9 to 5 because everyone does a 9 to 5. But maybe if you really thought about it, you could be like, well, I could also kind of start a business and, after, my 9 to 5 and work on that for a couple of years and then maybe make an impact in my community or my family or, the people around me that I love with even just a small business or, just as an example, or maybe doing charity work or whatever. Like it's not to say that a 9 to 5 does not allow you to do those things. What it is to say is that a 9 to 5, I think, clouds your vision for other things because through college, you're in 4 years of everyone going down the exact same tunnel, trying to pass classes, trying to get grades, trying to get a degree so that they can get a job. It's like the same exact tunnel. And so I think that the longer you go down that tunnel, the harder it is to see outside of it.
Mhm.
Right. Um, and then I think also in that same sense, college has the potential to really put a tunnel on your intellect, right? I think that there are certain degrees out there, like for example, history degrees that can be they can have a lot of variation depending on who is the professor of the class or who's teaching the class, or political sciences, for example, or gender studies, or even art or stuff like that, right? Like classes like those or can be very ideologically charged or politically charged potentially, depending on the class. And so I think that if you're in that kind of environment, it again can narrow your view down. And I think that's just a kind of a byproduct of the college environment because you're so focused on trying to pass the classes, get through the material, learn the stuff, graduate, get a degree, get a job, that there isn't that space. Like college as an ideological idea, I think, is a space to communicate different ideas and collaborate and learn and understand, right? But I think that fundamentally, kind of what it's gone down to is a competition for assignment completion. And that is a very narrow window that only and then it also rules out a lot of the students who could be very intelligent, but just don't do well with that kind of narrow windowed thinking. And then they're stuck in this box for whatever reason. Maybe their parents forced them to go, or maybe they thought it was a good idea, or maybe someone convinced them along the line or whatever, right? But I think that is that narrowing of the mind, both from a achievement perspective of doing something more than just the traditional path, as well as a mental perspective of branching out your mind into different concepts because of the tunnel formed by the structure of college, I think is the biggest con for me.
Mhm.
Um,
I think I agree more with the second point than the first,
okay.
because the first one speaks, I think, more so to a negative of the 9 to 5 career path than to college itself. Because, there's two ways that you could exit college. You could exit the way we did, which is going straight into the 9 to 5 and going from there. Or you could exit the way like Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak is, which is, you leave college and then you immediately start your own tech company with all the knowledge that you just got from college, right?
Yeah,
I would
I don't
say
think
that
they even graduated college.
they might have dropped that early, but like they went to college and then left and did that immediately. And there's other people that do that too. They go on to do like patent work and stuff like
Mhm.
that. Um, but I think generally speaking, college probably does push you and encourage you to go get a 9 to 5. That's what they would like recommend as the next step. And that's what everyone else is doing. So like if you want to follow the rest of the herd sheet, it's
Right.
probably a popular choice. But I don't think it's like, I don't think it's like the only option. I don't think it pigeonholes you into it.
Yeah, I guess my contrary argument would be, how many people other than me did you know that didn't want to get a 9 to 5 coming out?
But you didn't want to do anything with engineering when we left college.
That is true.
So you're a little bit of a different case.
Yeah,
But
but I'm even making a more general claim than that
right.
to say not just how many people didn't want to use their degrees coming out of college, how many people didn't want to join a 9 to 5 coming out of college, right? The 9 to 5 is even more general because you know you could I guess it's more general. Is it? I think it is. Maybe not. I
think-
don't know. I guess I'm asking a different question.
Yeah, I think what I'm getting at is the people who want to go to college to get engineering degrees want to leave college to do engineering. And they could leave college and do engineering at a 9 to 5, or they could leave it and do it in their own company or like a startup or something like that. Like the method to which you use your degree outside of college is different, right? Because some people don't want to work a 9 to 5, but some people are fine with it because the hours don't really matter and the structure doesn't really matter as much as the content of the work, like doing engineering, right? But I can see your point, and that's the way that everyone thinks. Like most people probably aren't like, oh, I want to go start my own shit, right? Because like it's easier to just follow like Miklo did, like go work for Lockheed and then build like whatever. Because the 9 to 5 to a lot of engineers is a vessel in which you can gain access to resources and more knowledge to get better at what you're doing, and then take it from there into your own company if you want to, or do great things for that company. But there were a couple people. I feel like there were a couple people on the 3D filament recycling team in our senior year that were like, I want to take this idea and then build my own thing and then have that be my main thing. So if they do a 9 to 5, it's kind of like just a source of income short term while they can get this other thing going, because their like Kava bar, their drop shipping is the 3D filament recycling thing, right? But I don't know many of those kids. I think that they're less common for sure.
Sure.
I just don't think that it's a
con of college directly. It's
more it's like an
indirect 9 to 5.
Yeah, it's like an indirect byproduct that's negative of college usually. But the second point is really compelling about closing your mind to those other options, right? Because it kind of feels like you only have one way.
Well, because you spend 4 years chasing assignments and correct answers instead, largely chasing assignments and correct answers, rather than critical thinking, thought, and going outside the box for a lot of stuff, right? And I would even argue that social science degrees are largely like that, because a lot of social science classes and what's the name for it?
Like psychology.
Yeah, like stuff like that, like has a very set way. And
fine arts. That's what they call it. Like a college of fine arts instead of
STEM. Oh yeah, sure. I was looking for a different word that was more simple than that, but that's okay. That works too. So it was for something else. It was like a different. Don't worry about it. It's all good.
That's good.
But a lot of those fine arts style of degrees have a very set rubric and a set way of thinking, and psychology has a very set layout of how they go through a given process, or how they diagnose someone, or how they look at different patients, or different psychological aspects of X, Y, and Z, right? And so even in those kinds of fields where you would think like it's more about opening up your mind to possibilities, I think that even in those, it's very strict and aligned, right? And you see that in medicine too, of course, like there's a very, doctors go through 10, 12 years of school where it's a lot of memorization and learning how the system works and how they do things, and not necessarily why are we doing this, right? I've listened to a lot of interviews with different doctors, specifically in regards to a lot of the newer gender transition surgeries that have come out, because that's just something that's interesting to me as a topic. But a lot of those doctors talking about how that medical knowledge was stated as fact rather than as of this is what we're doing now, right? And if you were against that fact or that norm, what I'm trying to say is that even stuff that you would think would be more open to discussion because it's newer was taught in a mindset of this is factual information, this is how it goes, right? And then the facts change, and then it's taught like that, and then the facts change and it's taught like that. But there isn't an environment, at least from what I've heard, obviously I'm not a doctor, but there isn't quite the environment of like, why are we doing this, and questioning. And a lot of those people and a lot of those doctors or scientists, even, you could go into that too, that question the norm, like maybe Graham Hancock or Evan Windman, I think. He talks a lot about climate science and models and stuff like that, or just really interesting stuff. A lot of those people are very ostracized. Or Duesberg, I believe is his name.
Doofenshmirtz.
What?
Doofenshmirtz.
I don't think so.
He's a character from Phineas and Ferb.
Okay, yeah.
Is that a Doofenshmirtz?
No. I'm probably mixing up his name. It's something like Duesberg, but he was a scientist who worked through the AIDS crisis in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s to try and understand what was happening and why. And he was very ostracized out of the community for his opinions, and was a very, very high standing scientist in the community for a long time. And then when he came out with his opinions about the AIDS crisis and what was going on and why, he was very ostracized and didn't receive any grants after that point and was essentially pushed out of the community. But what I'm trying to say is that even in fields where you would think that critical thinking is a lot more important than just like numbers on a board or engineering diagrams for I-beams, right? Even in stuff separate from that, there's a very fine tunnel that a lot of the material is taught down.
Yeah, there's a great comparison there with the RFK stuff that's happening right now, because in the Senate hearing that they had today, there was a lot of talk about all the Democrats were really focusing on the anti-vax stuff that RFK has said, and they're attributing anti-vax. They would say like, so you don't think any vaccines work and they're all bad. And he was like, that's not what I've said at all. They're like, it says right here that you don't like vaccines. And he's like, well, no, I'm saying we should question like, how efficient they are, and we should do more studies to see, if the risks outweigh the benefits and whatever, because obviously they work, but what if there are side effects and et cetera? Like there's proof of studies being falsified and stuff. But a great example is that over COVID, he was labeled as a conspiracy theorist because he said, well, what if this isn't airborne? Like, what if the 6-foot thing doesn't matter? What if masks don't matter, right? And Anthony Fauci at the time was like,
what if it was created through genetic mutation and gain of function research in a lab in Wuhan?
Right. And so it started with, you don't need masks and you don't need to socially distance. It didn't come from a lab. And then it was, you have to wear masks, you have to socially distance. It didn't come from a lab. And then it was, you don't have to wear masks, you don't have to socially distance. And it did come from a lab. But the certainty with which Fauci would say it was like, this is the way it is. We have it figured out. Earth is the center of the universe. It's fact. And then fucking a year later, he'd be like, well, okay, it's the sun. It's the center of the universe. But like, we killed the guy who figured that out so that no one remembers him, Galileo.
Yeah.
There was a lot of discussion about that today in the Senate hearing. And RFK's disposition was basically just like, I don't disagree with anything, but I want to start opening up all of the studies to publishing for the taxpayers to read. Like even the ones that like don't have a conclusive decision at the end, we should say like, hey, not only here's what we know, but here's more importantly what we don't know. And you don't hear anything from the government that says we don't know, right? You always hear like redacted or like, I can't share that or whatever.
Yeah. Very rarely do we get something from the government that's like, I don't know what this is. I think the only thing that we have that I would even question is there was UAP files released a couple of years ago that the government said they didn't know what these were. But I mean, I would personally question that to say, like, are they just saying they don't know to protect that point, or are they saying they don't know because they actually don't know? That's just a personal question for me.
Yeah, they probably, there's probably someone buried deep, like in an underground bunker, who does know what it is, but not what it is. Like they have more information, more context, but they don't know how it works, right? So it's like, if you and I saw a race car drive down the road, we'd be like, that's a race car, right? I don't know what engine's in it or like, what fuel system they're running, but I know it's a race car. But if you put a member of an uncontacted tribe at Daytona, he'll be like, what the fuck? And like, where the uncontacted tribe? Out there somewhere is a Mason and Sander who knows it's a race car, but not how it works. I think.
Yeah. But I agree. I think that, that tunnel vision style of thinking, I think, is really dangerous, because I think a lot of really great ideas have come out of people who think against the norm and then think critically about the world around them. And a lot of the times, I mean, it sounds kind of silly, but a lot of the times, a lot of great theories and studies come out of looking at things through a lens of common sense and being like, does this make sense? Right?
Yeah.
For example, like, a lot of the model, actually, I believe all of the current mainstream models for climate change push a greenhouse effect across that is centered around the equator out to the poles, and then add a runaway effect to the poles to say that the poles are going to warm exponentially in comparison to the equator. All right, because the greenhouse effect is only prominently present between positive 22.5 and negative 22.5 latitude, right? Okay. And so essentially what they say is if there's a 1.5% increase at the equator, then that will run away to the poles and cause a greater increase at the poles of approximately 6 degrees, leading to greater ice melting, sea levels rising, blah, 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 right? but there's a lot of challenge in certain parts of the community around climate science and climate change. It's also very interesting how this is all framed. This is a completely other discussion, but when you ask a scientist, is climate change real? A lot of them are going to say yes, but that doesn't encapsulate, do you think the climate is going to warm by 1 degree or 5 degrees or 10 degrees, right? Like, it's a very broad question. Like, I don't think many people would disagree that it changes.
Can I give you a totally different example?
Sure. I was going to finish.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Finish yours. Yeah.
Yeah, but what I was going to say is that, there's this mainstream idea that the runaway effect from the equator is going to influence the poles by a factor of 4, and they're going to cause melting and blah, blah, blah. And seals
The Miklo effect, the Miklo meltdown. It's like ocean levels will rise by 25 feet and Florida will be 6 feet underwater.
Exactly. But the runaway effect is only present in nature and in labs when there is a restriction of where the energy can go, right? And so these models are essentially not completely negating, but largely negating due to the lack of definition in the model. The fact that this heat and this change in the atmosphere and the changes in local weather can actually have an influence on the ability for this runaway effect to occur, right? And so they completely negate that and just say, well, the heat has to run away this way, and then cut out a ton of different factors, and then they just say that, and they say that if it's forced to go here, this is what will happen, right? But that could very well not be the case, because the models are relatively low definition in comparison to the great complexity of our atmosphere, the environment, and the Earth.
There's a saying.
And so what I'm trying to say, I'm sorry.
Oh my God.
What I'm trying to say is that style of thinking comes from looking at the situation with common sense and being like, okay, what is a runaway effect?
Yeah.
Does it work in this situation? Why or why not? But it does not come away, that style of thinking does not come from tunnel vision. This is the mainstream line of thinking. This is what's happening. Let's solve it, right?
Yeah.
And so what I'm trying to say is that a lot of great theories or ideas, whether they're right or wrong, a lot of great thinking comes outside of that tunnel that college, I think, largely puts you in.
Yeah. There's a great saying at work in regard to the climate change models, which is that no models are right, but some are helpful.
Right.
And something, I think one of the biggest takeaways that I have from college is that you start every single answer to a problem, and every single proposition of a problem with your assumptions, right? And so if you take every climate change model and you state out your assumptions, which is like, I'm assuming, XYZ factors, right?
Yeah.
And then you present your model, then you can have a way more rational decision than if you ignore the assumptions and then someone brings up an assumption later and then you think you're being attacked and so you get emotional about it, right?
Right.
But I had an interesting conversation. I had a ton of interesting conversations with my girlfriend in college because she was a psychology major, and a lot of her stuff I just like take the piss out of it just because I'm like, I like the thought. That's how I learn, right? Is I fuck around with it. I try to find loopholes. Like, do you remember one time fucking Miklo or no, Darshan? What was the thing with Darshan with the global warming or something? It was like Darshan was like, if you take a Braden-Dayton cycle engine and then you run it backwards, what happens? And you were like, the plane flies backwards. And he was like, no. It was something like that, right? But that's how I learn is I think about dumb shit and then you shoot it down. And sometimes you say dumb shit and then they can't shoot it down right away. And so then I'm emboldened and I run with it. So we did that a lot with psychology while we were dating in college. But I did one with Justin today because Justin sent me something on the low side that was like a YouTube video. And so then I sent him something back and then he sent me something. He sent me the video of the F-35 crashing. Or no, the Black Hawk crash.
Yeah, the Black Hawk hitting that commercial airliner.
Yeah, and I was like, that's a terrible quality video. And he was like, yeah, but I don't have anyone better. And I was like, here's one that's better. And I sent him, it was a 2.5-hour podcast of a guy doing a drug tier list, like an S to F tier list. And Justin was like, what the fuck is this? And I was like, it's a better video. And he was like, but not of the crash. And I was like, nah, I just thought it was interesting. But that sparked the conversation, which was, what is the difference between trying cocaine and going skydiving?
Well, quite a few differences, I would say.
Fundamentally, you're doing something that has high risk for high adrenaline.
Sure.
Right.
But they are very different vehicles.
Sure. Yeah. But they're both addicting.
Yeah.
Both of them get you really amped up and excited.
Right.
Both of them could have huge health ramifications.
True.
One of them's done way more frequently than the other one.
Cocaine.
Well, Justin was like, Justin was like trying to get me to go skydiving, and I was like, nope, I won't do skydiving or scuba diving for the same reason I won't do cocaine, which is the risk is not worth the reward for me.
Yeah.
And he was like, those are wildly different. I was like, they're not that different. So we started talking about it because there's plenty of people that's good at go skydiving and don't hit the ground at 250 miles an hour and get paralyzed from the neck down. There's also lots of people who do cocaine and then don't get addicted to it or die early.
Right.
So why don't you try cocaine instead of going skydiving? And it was a really interesting discussion that we had. And ultimately what we ended up saying was, well, generally what I found through this like 40-minute conversation, not at work because we were working at work, was when you take drugs, the experience is internal. It's in your head. And when you go skydiving, the experience is external. It's outside of your body. And people largely are very afraid of shit happening inside their own head that they can't control. Even though you can't control a cocaine high any more than you can control skydiving. Because if your parachute doesn't open, there's nothing you can do about it. If you have a bad trip on LSD, there's nothing you can do about it. The difference is people, I think, feel more safe if they have their like mental sanity and mental fortitude while it's happening.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because if I'm going to die...
That's why I met this so wild, because you're not sane at all, but you think you are.
that if I'm going to die a gruesome death, right? I don't want to be fucking mentally present for it, right? And like, if I'm going to go skydiving and the parachute doesn't open, you have 10 seconds to figure it out before you die or are paralyzed horribly, right?
Right.
But I'd rather do cocaine and fight a cop, you know? But anyways, I thought that was an interesting thing. And then also while you were talking, you mentioned the climate shit. And I thought today of, did you see the Instagram thing I sent you today of the dinosaur? You didn't. It's so cool, dude. Look at this. They found like the most preserved dinosaur ever. I didn't actually send it to you. Check this out.
Yeah, that's why I didn't see it, because I think I saw everything you said.
It was so, look at this. Look at that.
Wow.
This is
wild.
the most preserved dinosaur that they have ever found ever. And it looks fucking incredible. That looks just like,
it looks like it was alive yesterday.
yeah, it looks like all of the renderings that people make of this. It's called a Boreolopelta. It basically looks like an ankylosaur. But look at that. That's a top-down view.
Wow.
Isn't that incredible? So I thought of that. This is what it looks like otherwise. But like, this is the art that they made, and then that's the fucking dinosaur. It's so close, which gives me so much more confidence that all of the other dinosaur renderings are real, and they aren't like fucking bloated pigeons. And then I thought of the carbon deposits, because when people are digging for dinosaur bones, you can do carbon tests. And did you see the Lex Friedman and Joe Rogan podcast where they talk about Genghis Khan?
Yeah.
And how they know that he killed so many people because the carbon deposit changed in the earth. That whole podcast was interesting to me about how Genghis Khan like wasn't a super rapist.
Well, he kind of, sort of. I think it's sort of 50-50. I look forward to the podcast that Lex is going to have with that Genghis Khan specialist, whatever his name is.
Oh, did they not do one already?
I don't know. I have to look it up.
I'd be interested in learning about it, because when you think about the carbon deposits change and everyone has a little bit of Genghis Khan in them, you automatically think, oh, he like raped and murdered everybody, right? But the alternative perspective of, well, actually in their culture, if your husband is killed, then like you now belong to the next guy.
Right.
Is an interesting thought.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's also interesting to think about it. Like, Joe Rogan mentioned, it's like captor syndrome. It's something like that, where like
Stockholm syndrome?
Stockholm syndrome. Yeah. Where you like become attached to your captor or whatever. So there's interesting views in that sense. But it's funny that, or I guess, I don't know if it's funny. It's funny to me that Genghis Khan started. Genghis Khan started his whole thing because a neighboring tribe, I guess, took his wife, and so he decided to get her back, and he rose up an army, and then he realized he was good at it, and then he was like, I'll just do this more. So it's just freaking wild.
What's interesting is that he started this whole thing because his wife was captured, and so then when he went around, he was like, hey, we're not capturing and raping anyone else, because this what happened to me. It's why we're here. We're not doing it anymore.
Right.
Which gives more credence to the idea that like, if a dude like in this age where women belong to men, and like, you know, the Dothraki, like the savages, like the one who kills the most is the most respected. If your husband gets killed by like the King of Kings, wouldn't you want to be with him in that realm, like in that world? Wouldn't it be like more of a status symbol Like,
I don't know.
I'm one of his wives. And then he had the perspective that men are meant to conquer and women are meant to rule. So he'd go fuck up a tribe, kill all their people, and then put one of his wives in charge of that area to run it and then move on. And that's why they were so successful for so long.
Yeah.
The puzzle pieces fit. It makes sense. And I think it's a really interesting thought concept.
Yeah.
And that's why I think college is awesome. Anyways, so here are my cons. Number one is student loans.
True.
I think student loans fucking suck.
It is expensive. I completely negated that aspect of it. It is fucking expensive.
Yeah, well, we didn't have student loans, but
True.
a lot
I mean,
of
it was
people-
still expensive for my family, and it was
Right,
tough
right.
to get through at times. And
Yeah, student loans are stupid expensive. They never go away, and they have fucking retarded interest. So student loans suck. I think that we'll get into my thoughts later. Fucking con, they blanket con. Student loans suck.
sure.
Also, I think they require too many irrelevant courses. Why do I have to take English 1, 2, and 3 and a fucking engineering degree? That's what high school's for, right? So now I'm paying and adding to my student loans to take courses that shouldn't be necessary for my thing, right?
True.
And additionally, Elizabeth in her later psychology courses, I remember she had to do a project in her senior year. We were doing the TSD project, where I can't even remember what I designed. Do you remember? You did the Miata for your TSD project.
Yeah, I remember that vividly.
But it's a lot, right? So while I was doing my TSD project, Elizabeth had
did you
to
do the heated driveway?
No, that was, I think, Caden.
Okay.
I did, I wanted to do, I think I remember. I wanted to do a cooled and heated cup holder and a Lazy Boy recliner.
Oh, yes.
And then that eventually changed to, I think that we calculated the heat dissipation from a thermos, because the thermos has a gap between it with a vacuum. Anyways, I was doing that, and Elizabeth had to make like t-shirts with handprints on it. What the fuck? Like that, you shouldn't be paying for that, right?
Yeah.
It should be. So I think that they require too many irrelevant courses. I think that's a blatant con. Like no one wants.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of degrees that are just plain old stupid, in my opinion. But
I don't think that the psychology degree is stupid.
no, I don't think psychology is. But I think
Sure.
there are degrees out there that are like, why does this exist?
I think it's fine for any degree to exist if you're willing to pay for it, but I don't think that you should be made to take courses in order to get the degree.
Yeah, I
Or-
think there's certain degrees that have such a low yield on like return on investment. Like
I
there-
think that there's plenty that are stupid to do, but like
Right.
I don't think that means that it shouldn't exist.
That's
Right.
fair.
But I will say English in an engineering degree shouldn't exist. Similarly, if you're taking gender studies and you do a fucking course on Genghis Khan, that probably also shouldn't
There are a lot of
exist.
fucking nerds who
that.
can't write though.
Justin's one of them. Justin can't
Yeah.
read or write.
But and he went through all those fucking courses and he still can't read or write. So that's
At that point, I would say failure of the education system. But also, I don't
failure
think-
of Justin. Sorry.
if you can't read and write, you shouldn't be in college. Like you should do more high school. You know what I mean?
Yeah, fair enough.
One of the prerequisites for graduating high school should be that you're literate. I'm sorry, Justin.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Bye-bye.
So-
Justin.
So he doesn't watch these. So my last point is that it sometimes produces underqualified graduates. And that comes as a result, I think, of curving exams. I think it's ridiculous that they curve exams. I think if you have an exam so difficult that only 20% of your students can actually pass it legitimately, only 20% of the students should actually pass. Either make your exams easy,
or their
teach
material has to be taught better.
Right, exactly.
PDE, for example, I don't think anyone pretty much passes that class
Right.
at
Yeah.
all.
In my entire fucking
It
semester,
just curved up like 60%.
in my entire semester, I probably got 4 problems right.
Yeah.
And if that in the entire time. So like
Yeah.
I shouldn't be allowed to pass that, right? So either like make the material easier because maybe you never actually have to do problems that difficult in your field, or maybe teach the material better, like you're saying,
Yeah.
or change something. But like you shouldn't have 4 students in your class of 20 kids actually get it correct.
Yeah.
So those are my cons.
Agreed.
Are you ready for segment 2?
Sure.
Okay, so segment 2 is on alternative paths to success. So we can only really personally attest to the college education route because it's the route that we took, but I know of several others who I've seen success without a college education. Generally speaking, get good grades, go to school, get good grades, go to college, get a degree, get a job, get promotions is a safe and efficient route, but it's not for everyone. Not everyone wants to sit in a classroom for 4 years just to sit at a desk for the rest of their life. So I have a few alternative options here, and ultimately I've broken them down into 3 categories. So including college, there's 4. But the first one is acquire a low skill position. I think it's a totally valid path. There's a lot of people who lead really happy lives with low skill positions. This would be like the people who get jobs at grocery stores or gas stations, or working in the fast food industry. And honestly, I have a huge amount of respect for these people because they're able to do something that I can't, which is that job. because I had that job when I worked at the movie theater, and that job at the movie theater convinced me to apply for college because I was like, I cannot do this for the rest of my life. I'll fucking kill myself. I don't know how people do it and don't kill themselves. So for everyone who does it and doesn't kill themselves, thank you. I appreciate you. That's why, I tip it everywhere I go.
Yeah.
But it's a totally valid position. I know lots of people who work in those areas and they don't hate themselves. And the financial audit podcast that I sometimes watch with Caleb Hammer, a lot of those people, they're like, oh yeah, I make like $1,500 a month and I'm happy. And Caleb Hammer's like, you're $400,000 in debt. Did you know that? And they're like, well, no. But anyways, not those people. Low skill position. That's number one. Number two, learn a trade. So learning a trade is something similar going to college. The only difference is you're learning to work with your hands rather than working with your mind. And some tradesmen will go on to earn more than what a college degree would be, comparatively, right? So, my learning in engineering pretty much stopped at the end of college, but tradesmen go on to get way better at it, right? So this is like welders, blacksmiths, plumbers, mechanics, carpenters. And I have a huge amount of respect for these people too, because they're also doing something that I recognize I'm incapable of, because I worked at Dutchy Enterprises, the steel fabrication shop in college. And I was like, man, this is hard work and I'm really bored and I can't do this all the time. So there's a pattern here. And then the last one I have written down is learning how to sell, which is different from college and the trade. Because you aren't learning about something material like engineering or chemistry or law or welding or plumbing. You're learning about how to interact socially with people. So it's like car dealerships, real estate brokers, business dealings, Xerox salesmen like Robert Kiyosaki, and gym trainers like Alex Hormozy. And learning to sell is different from the others because there's no set rate of pay. So those are the four that I had. It's college, low skill position, learning a trade, or learning to sell. But what's interesting is that in three of the four, after college, you have to learn to do something. So it's either a trade, selling, or I guess whatever you'd learn in college. Let's just say STEM, because
Yeah, makes life easier.
yeah, this just as a quick lesson to everyone and not a STEM.
Political sciences.
Political sciences could be a lead into a law degree, which is fair.
True.
But let's face it, most don't. Let's stop at political sciences, right?
Yeah.
So what are your alternatives?
Alternatives to college?
Yeah. Or what do you think of mine if you don't have any?
I would agree with those. I think I would add becoming an entrepreneur. I think that kind of meshes between, some mental education similar to college and some sales education similar to sales, right? So I would add that in there. I think that that's a viable path, and I think there's been a good number of people that have come out of high school or even not graduated high school that became entrepreneurs of some sort, either in a trade field or in a online field or in a sales field or whatever, or started their own business.
Right.
Stuff like that. So I think entrepreneurship can kind of encompass a few of the different ones that you listed.
Yeah.
In terms of other paths, I think you covered it relatively well.
Yeah. It's interesting also, I was just considering athletics, because you can go on to pro sports, but that's kind of like a trade, right? Because you're learning to work with your body instead of your mind. I guess your mind is kind of both. But
what about becoming like an artist, like a painter or a musician?
I would say that's probably like a trade too, because you're learning something that's not strictly theoretical. You're learning to work with your hands. Like you can't be an artist if you don't have control over what your body can do, right? Same with music. I guess DJs are different if it's all
I
digital.
don't know. Because an artist isn't like, yeah, in some ways, yes. But then you have like a singer. Like there's a lot of singer-songwriters or SoundCloud rappers out there.
I would say that singers are closer to a trade because you have to practice your singing voice a lot.
Yeah.
There's actually one girl, I had this written down earlier, but I didn't say it. So last night was open mic night at Pauhana, which historically I've hated, but I've come to love because Joel starts playing there and I like to listen to Joel. But there's this new girl, her name is Valeigha, Valeigha. But she sang last night and she was so good, I took my earbuds out.
Oh, really?
Like genuinely, I was in the middle of working and I heard her singing and I took my earbuds out and I was like, well, I took a break from work to listen because I was like, this is really good. And she's on Spotify, so I had Callie get her Spotify and I downloaded some of her stuff.
Cool.
But I was telling Joel about her and I was like, dude, why can't everyone at open mic be this good? And then there was another girl who's new in town who also sang really well last night. I didn't get her name or her Spotify, but I was like, dude, I wish that every night were like this at my open mic night because I would enjoy it way more. And then Joe got up and started singing country music. And I was like, fuck me, I'll kill myself. But
not Joel.
no, Joe.
Joe,
yeah. But it just goes to show that people who practice their singing voice and people who don't, there's a huge discrepancy. So I would argue that it's more like a trade, similar to like, I think we used welding as an example, right? Like
Yeah.
it's a trade with your hand instead of your voice, but it's still a physical thing that you're changing.
Yeah. It's a practice. Man, I was gonna say it's like a practice makes perfect kind of industry as an umbrella, but I mean that could be applied to anything. Anything is practice makes perfect.
That's fair. Yeah.
So I'm not sure.
It could be like it's undoable without practice.
Yeah.
Like you cannot be a good welder if you don't practice.
Yeah. I mean, but that's to do with entrepreneurship or engineering.
You could be good at engineering without practice. There's some people I've met who are naturally talented. Like they pick
Sure.
stuff up really fast.
I mean, but that's for anything though.
I get. I don't know. I don't know of anybody who would fucking knock TIG welding out of the park the first time.
Yeah,
Actually talented singers.
singing
Yeah,
or musicians.
that's fair. Yeah.
There's some like I don't know what the technical word for it is, but like prodigy kids out in the middle of nowhere that can just like play a fucking guitar perfectly the moment they pick it up.
Right.
Like just weird cases like
Savants,
that.
that's what it-
Savants.
Yeah. It's people with autism.
Not prodigy. My English is excellent.
A prodigy's that.
I took English
word.
classes at Florida Tech.
Yeah.
That's the bar.
Prodigy is valid too. Prodigy is like someone who's naturally good at something inexplicably and with very little like effort.
Yeah.
And then a savant is someone who has a mental disability like autism, but is really good at one thing. So like Einstein figured out theory of relativity, but couldn't tie shoes, like that kind of thing.
Do you think that there are certain paths you can go down that are more, what's the word for it? Like, they're better. Do you think there's certain paths that you can go down that are better vehicles for your self growth than other paths? For example, is like becoming a musician a better path to your personal self growth than going into a low skill labor job, or is entrepreneurship a better path for self growth than either of those? Or
I think you gotta quantify self growth, operationalize self growth.
I would, yeah,
Because
I haven't thought of
monks sit in rooms with nothing in it and probably have the best self growth of anybody. They don't do any of these. They don't
that's
do
an
shit.
interesting thought.
It's not even a low skill thing because self growth in itself is a skill with self reflection and self thought. Right?
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought too.
But it's a great thought because it means that no matter what trade you're in, it doesn't matter because you're capable of self growth. So if you're not doing it, it's a conscious choice.
Yeah.
Instead of
It's just like,
Right,
how are you
right.
defining self growth?
how would I define self.
No, that's
Oh,
the question in the
Right. Yeah.
within the question is like it depends on how you define self growth for you to understand what vehicle is best for your self growth.
Well, yeah, and you can extend that out to what path is the most successful, right? But then it depends on your clarification of success, because if success is meeting your goals, then the monk is successful as Alex Ramosi, who fits in a couple of these categories, right? I think that everyone has like a preferred path, but I don't know. I think that there's definitely ones that I would be unhappy in. I would be unhappy in a low skill position, and it's because I've been in those positions and they fucking sucked.
Yeah.
But I mean, for us to do this podcast, we don't have to follow any one of these. So like if all else fails, we still have the podcast.
True. I mean, we do try to improve it though. I mean, we do focus on analytics here and there.
Yeah, but we don't have to. It's not a low skill position. It's not particularly a trade. It's not selling, and it's not going to college.
Yeah. It's more maybe closer to monk mode where we just sit around and think about ourselves and the things around us.
We should rename the podcast to Monk Mode.
We should.
Yeah. So those are my categories that I figured out.
Yeah, I like those categories.
Alternative.
I give those categories 10 out of 10.
Really.
Well, 9 out of 10 because I added entrepreneurship.
Thank God for your valuable input this week. Okay.
Hey man, hey! I asked a good question. I've been going back and forth. I think I'm doing okay.
Okay. For having nothing prepared, absolutely, you're doing great.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is our last segment, which is
High speed. Moving through segments at high speed because Sander is well prepared.
okay. The first segment was what are the pros and cons, which I thought would be the fastest segment, and then the second one was what are alternative paths, which I thought would be the longest segment. Because I figured you'd have some rant about how entrepreneur
Shit my brain out in the first segment. It didn't have anything for the second one.
Well, I thought I genuinely thought that there would be more debate here because I thought that there would be a bigger disagreement, but I think that's going to happen in segment 3,
Okay.
which is our thoughts on education.
Mm,
Okay. So I have a little thing written out and then I'll ask you your opinion,
got it.
but listen to me talk first. I have personally had quit smiling. Yeah, you dope. I've personally had a deep dilemma with the validity and importance of college degrees. I've changed my mind back and forth many times, and I won't be surprised if it happens again in the future. For as stable a path as through college as the workforce is, the struggle to pay off student loans, the peer pressure to pursue a degree that will not earn enough money to pay that loan, and the amount of irrelevant coursework we had to complete to move through college really calls in the value of the stability into question. Additionally, to muddy the waters, I've successfully completed this path and yet without student loans, and I'm still not content with this lifestyle. With that said, my personal preferences shouldn't dictate whether or not a system is successful. I feel that college does, for the most part, help bridge the gap between high school and the workforce and sets up most graduates for success. With that said, I think I have a few improvements. So the TLDR of all that is, I think college is a good thing, but I don't think it's perfect. The first thing, I have a really interesting idea about college debt, which is that it should not be forgiven, but I think it should have little to no interest because I think that free college is ridiculous.
Yeah.
High school should be free for everyone to give them a basic education, but I don't want to pay for someone else to go cheat through PDE. That's fucked. It shouldn't be free, right? You should have to pay something. But when thinking about student loans, because I'm watching Grace go through her student loans, I don't have any, but watching Grace go through her student loans, what sucks is a fucking 12% interest rate. Not the whatever fucking $40,000, $50,000. That's fine.
Yeah.
You can pay that off. I think it's totally reasonable to get a degree in engineering that's worth $100,000 to give me the ability to go make $100,000 a year.
Right.
That's valid. What's not valid is charging 12% interest and having that $100,000 turn into fucking $800,000 over the course of 12 years. Right.
Yeah.
So those are my thoughts. No interest. I also think that curving exams should be completely eliminated because I think it's fucked. I think irrelevant coursework should be eliminated. We kind of talked about that earlier too. And then I don't think that degrees should be standard 4-year degrees. I think they should take as long or short as they need. So like as many credit hours for the coursework that you think is relevant. So like the t-shirt example that I had from earlier shouldn't exist. If you're getting to the point where you have to stretch to make assignments like that, just fucking cut the degree. Like you're good, right? A psychology degree does not have to be as long as an engineering degree, does not have to be as long as a medical degree.
Yeah.
Right?
Agreed.
On everything?
No. Just with what you've been saying. I said agreed because I understood what you said, not because I agreed with everything.
Agreed.
So I spent the last 30 seconds trying to think of a name of someone, and I still couldn't think of it. So I'm just gonna do it.
Try to think of what?
A name of someone that I really like their take on college and has influenced my opinion on college as well.
Is it a real person or?
No, it's the guy who he's a right-wing guy, and he was really active this past year. He went to colleges to debate college students.
I know.
The value of college.
He's like the Ben Shapiro, but he's fat.
Yeah, kind of. Fuck me. What's his name? Charlie Kirk.
Charlie Kirk.
Yes.
That's his name.
Got it after 45 seconds.
Yeah.
30.
Yeah.
So Charlie Kirk has a really interesting take on the value of college. And he goes about it by saying, how do you define a valuable product, right? And you define a valuable product by you get what you pay for out of it.
What is that value equation?
Oh, fuck, dude. I'm sorry, man. I'll let you down. Tell it to me.
The value equation is time delay times perceived likelihood of achievement over dream outcome times effort and sacrifice.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So my brain can't comprehend that in my mind. I can't visualize in my mind. But
can I give you a secret?
You can.
Can I give you a secret?
Yeah.
That is one of the passwords to one of my accounts that I frequently log into.
Oh, yeah.
Not the whole fucking thing, but like a version of that. It's not anymore. I've since changed it. But I have that because when I first heard Hormozy say it, I changed it to my lock screen on my computer to try to remember it. But I never look at my lock screen on my computer.
Yeah.
So instead I changed it to my password for one of my accounts and I remembered it.
Nice.
That's how I memorized.
Very nice.
Yep.
Anyways, he has a really interesting take where he's like, you pay a boatload of money to get a degree that a huge percentage of people after 5 years after getting their degree will not use anymore, or that are unsatisfied with it or don't like the position they're in. And so his argument is that although college gives you some level of knowledge to prepare you for some degree or some topic or whatever you're interested in, there is not an effective vehicle to actually understand whether you are going to like that field or like being in that position. And so because although college gives you some level of some education, a lot of the time students can't recite what they learn, but that's just because some students just suck, right? Like some students just don't give a shit. These get degrees and they're there to ride out the bottom, right?
Right.
But his his point is like, although college may give you some level of education about some stuff, it doesn't actually deliver on the product that it says it's going to deliver on, because it doesn't properly put you in a position to understand what you're getting into. There isn't a proper understanding of like how much this is going to cost or how much this is going to make. There isn't a guarantee of how much you're going to make. There isn't a guarantee of job stability in every single given degree out there. STEM degrees might be great, but if you're going in for gender studies, you might have hard time finding a job to pay off that massive student loan that you have, right? And so his argument is like, it's not a good product fundamentally because there's a very large percentage of people that don't end up using the product 5 years after they acquire it in the form of acquiring the degree. And then on top of that, there's a lot of stuff out there in college that has no impact on your ability to earn back the money you invested in the first place, like low ROI degrees, I would say, like, gender studies or whatever, or studying historic art or whatever, right? Stuff like that. And so I think that's a really good take. I don't think that necessarily says that college is a failure. I think what it does say is that the value of college is misconstrued.
Yeah.
I think that there's a gap between what people think college gets them and what college actually gets them. And I don't think that there is there's not a good system in place to fill that gap right now. And I think that's largely advantageous to colleges because there's a lot of kids who got in and they don't really know what they're doing. Their parents convince them to do it. They're kind of going for this thing they're sort of interested in. They spend a bunch of money and then they realize they don't like it, right?
Right.
That's not the college's fault. The college offered that degree because there's a bunch of students who don't know what they're doing and decide they like that thing, right? College didn't, pop out of the ground one day and be like, we're going to do a bunch of historic art degrees and all of these, low ROI degrees because we think that students will like them. No, students who didn't know what they were doing came along and said, I'd like to have a job out of that. And they said, why don't you teach that? And they said, oh, well, we can teach it. And then they made it, right? And so I think a lot of the problem with these degrees actually has stemmed from students being pressured into going to college because that's the right avenue to go down, but they don't really know what they're doing because there's no clear education about why to go to college other than like, it'll get you a job that makes you money, right? But there's no like breakdown of like how much money you're going to make. Is it worth it? What are these loans like? There's so many kids that go into college that have no idea how bad the insurance is going to, burn them at the end when they're trying to pay off these big loans. And it might seem trivial to like you and I, because like, we work with money related things and interest related things often. But for a lot of these kids, especially coming out of high school, who never had any financial education through high school, and maybe their parents aren't very financially educated, like have no idea what 12% interest actually turns out to be.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that ultimately, I think the best fix would be to have a financial education and a kind of like why choose college style of class or classing in the form of several classes in high school so that students going into college really understand what they're going for and why.
Yeah.
And so I think that although college is a good system, potentially can be a good system, it is flawed because it acquires a lot of students that don't know what they're doing, right? And even if they get good grades through high school, that's not necessarily indicative of how well they'll do through college. And that's clearly evident by the fact that the first year dropout rate at any college is much higher than the second, third, or fourth year dropout rate.
Right.
Your likeliness of admission into a college after going to college for 1 year, like let's say you went to a community college for a year, then you wanted to apply to Florida Tech, right? If your grades are bad in high school, if you apply directly to Florida Tech, you probably won't get in, right? But if you go to a college for a year and show that you're relatively proficient, your chances to get into Florida Tech for your second, third, and fourth year is much, much higher.
That's how Frank snuck in.
Yeah. Exactly.
So it wasn't a DEI thing. It was fucking a different loophole.
Yeah. But it's like, that really shows that, colleges see that there's a lot of students that gamble coming out of high school to get into college, and they kind of like gamble on what they want to do, and they either drop out or they don't make use of the degree, right? But I think that's not really the fault of the college, because the college has changed because the students have asked it to change, not because the college has pushed a change on the students,
Yeah.
right? And so my take is like, you know, is the education valuable? Yes, I think there are flaws, man. I think that tunnel vision style of learning and thinking is a big flaw, right? And I think that there are potentially flaws in, you know, the style of learning from that sense. I think you raise a great point that like a t-shirt painting class should not be the same length as a partial differential equations class, right? And they should not be the same amount of credits, right?
Right.
Like,
But
I bet if
right.
you gave me, I bet if you gave me 8 months to learn partial differential equations, even if my instructor was SpongeBob, I'd probably figure it out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if I had enough time. But if I have fucking 10 weeks to figure it out,
Yeah, it's fast.
I don't know if I'm gonna figure it out, right?
Yeah.
And so there's just I think there's a mismatch there, and I think that's part of the institutionalization of college, right? Like all colleges kind of follow the rubric of, you know, 2 or 3 semesters, semesters or trimesters, depending. But they all kind of get within 4 years, and they all kind of align with similar credits, and they all kind of have similar requirements. And that's why you can change between colleges so relatively easily and transfer your credits and blah, 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 right? And there are more alternative style schools coming out, but then there's the question of like, are these actually valid? Like, is the degree from alternative school number 17 as valid as the degree from Florida Tech, right?
Right.
So there's a lot of questioning there. And, you know, at the end of the day, I think that if the real foundational point where this problem starts from is high school students not understanding why they go to college. I think that leads to all of the crazy weird degrees that have a low ROI that we see. I think that leads to the high dropout rates. I think that leads to the poor grades that we see in the first year of students rather than later on. I think that leads to a lot of students not using their degrees 5 years after they graduate college, right?
Right.
But foundationally, I think that there has to be a better system and education and knowledge kind of input for high school students to understand why they go.
Yeah.
And I think that would solve a lot. I think that if that happened inherently, I think that would actually solve a lot of the problems with college, because then probably a higher percentage of students would go into higher ROI degrees,
Mhm.
right? Like STEM. And then a higher percentage of students would actually think about why they're going. And then maybe the first year dropout rate wouldn't be so high for all these colleges.
Right.
Right. And so I think that inherently it would have solved a lot of the problems in college if you tackled the uninformed student at the high school level.
Yeah, I think that devil's advocate of Charlie Kirk's position on the other end, like a different way to attack the same problem would be to say that college actually does a really great job of what college is meant to do, but people don't understand what college is meant to do.
Mm,
So, like, most people assume that you go to college so that you can get a degree to get a job, but college is there for you to get a degree, and that's it.
yeah.
College doesn't give a fuck.
I thought about it even from a crazier perspective, which is just like college is just an institution to make money off of you, and they profit off of your ignorance.
Well, no. What I'm saying is like the purpose of going to a college is to learn information on a specific topic to a sufficient degree, right? That's what they call it,
Yeah,
because it's your degree of understanding, right?
sure.
But what most people do is they'll take it one step further, which is everyone's plan is to get a degree because the prerequisite for a lot of jobs is to have a degree. So I'll get a degree and then I'll go get the job. And so they anticipate that the function of college is to get you a job. That's the end state, but it's not. It's one step earlier. The function of college is to get you a degree. And a lot of students, just like you're saying, are misinformed in thinking that, well, I can get a degree in anything and then I can get a job in whatever is interesting to me because jobs require that degree.
Yeah.
Right. But then they don't stop to understand, like, well, are there any jobs in gender studies anymore? Because over half of the DEI officers and the fucking whatever in all these corporations are quitting. So like now I don't have a fucking option, right?
Mm,
But you can also consider wealthy people, right? Like a girl, fucking whatever. The example doesn't really matter. Wealthy people sometimes go back to college to get degrees in things that they think are interesting because they think they're interesting. And they're not actually going to go, like, they want to get a degree in history because they think history is interesting. They don't want to be a historian or professor. They just think it's cool. And now I have the money to spend on it. So like, I'll spend money to increase my education in this area that I like, and then I'll get a degree in it. But like, the degree doesn't mean anything because I'm here because I like it. But a lot of people, and a lot of younger people who don't have direction, automatically assume that the function of college is to get a job when it's not. The function is to get a degree. And so the decision that a lot of kids make incorrectly, I feel, based on what their goals are. Because if your goal is to get a job, college isn't going to do that for you. The degree that you choose is going to get that for you. And so you have to approach college differently, which I think
Yeah,
done.
there's the presumption that college gets you the job because many people coming out of college with a degree get a good job.
Right.
But at the end of the day, the college is delivering you a degree, and it's up for you to analyze whether that degree will get you a job.
Right. And I think that in part, that's why it's so shitty when you go to like your guidance counselor at Florida Tech and you're like, hey, what steps do I need to become a psychiatrist? And they go, okay, well, you have to take these classes and then get that degree. And then you, okay, like I'll go do that. And they're like, cool. Once you've done that, I think you have to do this training or something, but it's like, we're affiliated with some other company that does it, so you can go do it with them. We don't really care. And then you go, well, what the fuck, Florida Tech? Like, I'm paying you all this money to help me get this job. And then they go, well, no, you're paying us all this money so that we give you the degree.
Yeah,
And then
so we have to give you the opportunity to try and acquire the job.
And I think all too often people misconstrue the point of college when you're in high school because you don't really understand what you're doing at that point in time. You don't have the foresight to see what jobs are actually available, even like semi-legitimate jobs. Like a psychiatrist is not an easy position to get. It takes a lot of studying and then a lot of training and then a lot of shit after that, right? And the college isn't going to help you through all of that because their job is just to get you the degree, not the rest of the shit, right? And even then, once you're there, like you have to go work a psychiatrist's office, right? And those positions aren't really abundant either. So I don't know. I just think that a huge amount of the issues with college could be solved just by educating people on it before they go.
Agreed.
Which you're right, they don't do a lot of in high school. But additionally, I think that there's no finance classes in high school either. So like if I'm graduating college and I think that $3,000 is no big deal and I can pay it off in one paycheck, what the fuck would I have thought graduating high school going, oh yeah, rent is only $3,000 a month. That's fine, right? I'll go work at a gas station and make, $3,000.
$4,000 a month.
Exactly. I can cover it, right?
Then I can spend $1,000 on my car a month.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's the thought process you have in high school because they don't teach you anything about finances. So I wish that they did more financing courses in high school because if they taught you, hey man, it costs so much money to live and it's so hard to make money, then in high school you might consider, oh, okay, I have to take this seriously because either I'm going to fucking blow my back out every day working a manual labor job, blow my back out working a prostitution job, or get a fucking college degree. I think more people would probably nut up and try in a STEM degree or a degree with a higher ROI that even isn't STEM to try to make it work instead of taking it more like it's fun and casual.
Yeah. Now, do you think that the big banks have incentive to keep the student populace stupid so that they take on these massive loans, have tons of money to pay them back so that they can fuel their big banks and move this fucking money around and blah, 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 blah?
I'll ask you this. You're going to lend out.
I'm honestly, I haven't thought about this at all. I just threw out like generic conspiracy theory.jpg.
So imagine this. You're the bank.
Fuck you.
You're the bank. All right. You have the
Let's try and get some spicy content for all the Vision 79 subscribers.
Both of them?
All one of them.
So you have the money you have right now, right? And you're going to lend out $1,000. So like most of it, right? You're going to lend it out. Are you going to lend it out to somebody who is, they got good grades in high school. Now they're in college and they're getting good grades in college. It's like their first semester, right? And they need help paying their bills and they're going to be a chemical engineer. Or are you going to give your money to somebody who's taking their degree in gender studies and then they're going to they don't know yet, but they're going to figure it out when they graduate?
Well, actually, I think the insurance rates change based on your degree. I think there's some
the interest rate,
like the interest rate of the loan you take.
I don't know. I think private loans,
because they do an analysis of what you're going for and why.
I don't think so. When you're paying your interest rate off afterward, you can change the rate at which you pay it back based on income.
No, I've thought like Sally Mae loans and stuff like that will actually take into I don't know if they say they do, but I think they ask for like, what degree are you going for? What is your financial background? What are your high school grades? Like they'll take that stuff into account when they give you your interest rate.
You might need to do that to qualify for the loan, but I don't know if they change the rate. Maybe if you negotiate it.
Maybe.
But from what I've seen people with all kinds of degrees get like 11, 15% interest rates.
Right.
They get super fucked with it, right? But similarly though, either way, it's like, I'm not going to loan, as a bank, I'm not going to loan my money out to someone who I know, even if they don't graduate or even if they do graduate, they're not going to get a job and be able to pay me back. I'm not going to lend out $100,000 for a gender studies major, even at 25% interest. Dude, I could charge them 80% interest. They'll never pay it all back, even if I charge them out the nose for interest, because I know that they're not going to be able to do it, right?
Yeah.
They're going to default. Like, do you know how many people online are like, oh, here's a pro tip. If you don't pay on your student loans, they can't do anything about it. And then everyone stops paying on their student loans. That happens. Like, there are people who do that, and their interest rate fucking skyrockets, and then it's like the collections, and then they get their car repoed, and like, it goes to shit. But there's a lot of people who take on that risk, and then they're like, oh, fuck, I can't wait. Like, I can't pay it back. So, like, I'll just, wait for the government to bail me out. And then that doesn't happen, and they just drown in debt.
I'll spend my week diving into BlackRock college conspiracy theories for you, and then we can touch base next week.
It sounds good.
But
But I think genuinely, right? Like, if I were to loan my money out, I would want to loan my money out to someone who I think is going to make decent money, and is going to be able to pay me back, but I'll charge them a crazy interest rate, so it'll take a while, instead of loaning out my money to someone who I know probably isn't going to make anything and probably won't make any payments at all, right? So interestingly, like, I think that the banks probably have a better vested interest in like the medium to high ROI degrees, because it's more guaranteed that you're going to get your money back. Even if like a gender study degree costs 6 figures, you'll never see that money again. Gender studies, I wish that I had more examples than just gender studies, because there's some.
gender studies is a really good one because it's a really fucking stupid one, though.
It is, but there are a lot of really stupid ones. So I want to offend more people by having more.
Do you know the history of gender?
The history of gender?
Do you know like where the history where gender originated? Sorry, I'm tired, but where gender originated, where the term came from, and what study was used in order to validate gender as a different thing from sex.
No.
It's really interesting, and it's not appropriate for the podcast because I tell you, I mean, I can.
It's college. Gender studies, as of right now in 2025, is a part of college.
I can, but it's just like, it's just wild. I'll tell it. I encourage people to go and actually fact check me.
Don't worry about it. These are the facts. Tell me. Just tell like it's me.
Yeah.
Because we're not talking to an audience. This is documenting our process. So talk to me, and if people want to cancel you, they'll cancel you. But
yeah,
between us,
honestly, I'd rather double review it.
Don't. We're committed.
Okay. All right. I try my best.
Dude, I just told you that Genghis Khan wasn't a rapist. I'm already canceled, so focus on that. No one's making it this far into the podcast.
This is the after hours special. All the cancel clips.
Yeah. The podcast are the cancel clips. I thought about this the other day, because I was like, when I go into real estate, my reputation is going to speak on behalf for me. So like, I have to actually be like to make any amount of money. And if anyone finds the podcast, they might hate me and then not want to do it. Because when you Google me, the first thing
that's what I love about dropshipping, because no one knows it's me.
But here's the thing,
whack shit.
I thought about it, and then I was like, what's more important, having people like me or being myself? And I'd rather be myself. So if I lose sales, who cares?
Facts. Anyways, would you like to hear about gender?
More than anything.
All right. So,
what's your gender?
Male.
You sure about that?
You're gonna study it.
Have you tried other ones?
I have not. I don't feel like as though I need to.
Okay.
So gender came around in the 1960s with this guy John Money. John Money. He grew up in a relatively broken household. He grew up with a stepfather that abused him. And he wrote, I can't remember the title of the book, but he wrote a book later on in his life talking about how essentially all men were terrible, and that large swaths of the men should be castrated at a young age because they should not be allowed to reproduce, because look at how violent and crazy they are, blah, blah, blah.
Himself included, of course.
Yeah, well, actually, I think his story later in life gets relatively interesting. I can't quite remember the details, but he had some really weird views about like his own sexuality and gender and stuff like that. But anyways, he essentially had this theory that he started to develop that said that the only reason that we have men and women is because we are raised under societal norms to act like men and act like women. For example, when a boy is born, they are raised to play with trucks and play with in the sand and go hunting with dad and fishing.
As God intended.
Right. This could be really fucking hard to get through. I'm serious. I just thought I know.
I want to lighten the mood every once in a while because I know the sense.
No, I'm laughing. I enjoy the comedy. It's just like I'm gonna laugh a lot.
No,
anyway, so
I want to learn.
His idea of why we had men and women was because we were raised differently. So, fuck you, goddamn it, boy.
Let me drink, because I can't smile if I'm drinking.
Boys are raised as boys. They like trucks and sandboxes and fishing as God intended. And then girls, also as God intended, are raised to, like cooking and cleaning and, dresses and dancing. This is
They liked cooking and cleaning. I think they were encouraged to cook and clean.
I'm trying to get through this. My wording is not perfect because I'm trying to hold back the fucking laughter from me, you little shit. But anyway.
Okay. Traditional gender roles.
We got the idea.
They're called now they're shortened to trad. So they're called like trad relationships or trad women or trad men. It's traditional, right? That's what it stands for. This is genuine.
Relationships as God intended.
Sure.
Yeah. We got
a lot of Christian relationships are trad relationships because they're traditional.
Yes. But we can't say trans anymore when we're talking about transmission because that's offensive. But we can say trad when we're talking about traditional.
I think both are offensive.
Got it. Okay. It's all offensive. Anyways.
Instead, I'm going to call the transvestite on the corner a T56. Is transvestite offensive now too?
Probably.
Oh.
Probably.
I grew up hearing transvestite, so
yeah.
Anyways.
I grew up hearing other ones that are definitely offensive. So
really? You grew up in Mass? I thought I heard all the offensive ones and you've heard all the like.
Well, my mom was like, Soviet era, Soviet vocabulary.
So they grew up with traditional gender roles.
John Money had a theory.
Where did you hear all this stuff? A podcast?
Yeah, I went down some rabbit hole in regards to like gender studies and transgender studies specifically, and then the transgenderism push and gender affirming care on kids and how that happened, and where does gender come from? Where did it originate from? I went down a deep rabbit hole for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
I do a similar thing, but it's shorter. So like yesterday I learned about super glue from this Veritasium video, and then I watched a bunch of other ones.
Got it.
Have you seen that one?
No.
Dude, it's sick. Super glue started off, the guy was like trying to make a clear plastic for like canopies of jets, but it was super sticky. And he was like, this shit sucks. And then like one day he was like, hang on, fucking, can I stick this to anything? And he did. He stuck it to everything.
Oh,
but
wow.
What's interesting is that the glue, it's a liquid, so it fills all the cracks and crevices of the surfaces that it's touching. But it reacts with the air to start forming solid bonds. And so the more rigid the more porous the surface is, the better it sticks, which is why it sticks to skin so well, right? But if you stick it to something super flat, it doesn't stick.
Interesting. Anyways,
so John Money
had a theory that the only reason that we have boys and girls is because of how they're raised from children.
Right.
And so he proposed that you could have a boy born as a male, but raise them as a girl, and they would turn out to be a girl, right? In their mannerisms, in what they liked, in what they enjoyed, in how they acted, blah blah blah.
Okay.
They would turn out to be a girl because his theory was like, it doesn't matter whether you're born a boy or a girl; it just matters how you're raised.
Okay, got it.
So this couple came along. I used to know the names of this couple and the two brothers, but I no longer do.
Not friends anymore.
This couple, what?
You're just not friends anymore.
Not friends anymore.
Okay.
This couple had they had 2 kids, brothers, siblings.
Okay.
And they were identical twins. And after about 8 months, after having the kids, they're like, we should have them circumcised. They went and had them circumcised at a local hospital. The first kid went in, and the machine was set in what?
Do you think that Wolverine's superpowers reversed his circumcision? Because he has regenerative healing.
Maybe.
Okay, so this kid, one of them fucked the machine up.
No.
Cut the whole thing off.
When he went in for the circumcision, the doctors had set the machine incorrectly.
Okay.
And so they actually ended up burning his entire dick off. That's real, true story.
Yikes.
They burned his whole dick off. And so the parents were distraught. They're like, what do we do? I don't know what to do anymore.
RFK would say late term abortion. 3 days out. Abortion.
Yeah, so the family was distraught. They didn't know what to do. Long story short, the second kid did not get circumcised.
Okay. So one doesn't have one, and then the other one
One.
doesn't have one.
One of them has a non-circumcised dick, and the other one has no dick.
That's what I was thinking.
Okay, right. So they're at home trying to figure out what to do, and they see an advertisement on TV. This is now in the 70s, I believe, early 70s. They see an advertisement on TV for John Money's clinic, which he had started. And his clinic that he had started in this meantime, while he's formulating this theory, was essentially for specific related surgeries regarding gender. So it's like if someone, and it was also for surgeries in regards to complications. Like if someone was born to be neither gender, right? Sometimes people are born and it's unclear, right? He would perform surgeries to help that person.
Was he a doctor?
Yes.
Okay.
And then obviously in his clinic, he hired other doctors.
Oh, okay. I guess when you say
he wasn't like single-handedly running this clinic, chopping dicks up.
that's kind of what I thought he was. No, I thought he was a non-licensed doctor who like had a shed out back, and he was like, "Come on down and chop money."
I believe he was licensed, although I could double check that.
That's fine.
It's not quite as pertinent to the
I believe
the
you.
foundation of the story, but anyways, he was licensed.
Okay. He had a licensed doctor do it. Got it.
Yeah, so he ran this clinic to essentially help out people or kids that were kind of in between genders, or there was some complication with their genitals or the breasts, whatever. He would perform surgeries to help alleviate those problems that they had.
Okay. So he would go the direction that they wanted him to go.
Right.
Okay.
Right. But it's not like we see it today where a kid would show up and be like, I'm a boy, but I want to be a girl, right? His clinic initially was more focused on, do you have birth complications or complications today, and how can we help you?
Do you want to be normal?
Right.
Right.
Exactly. Now, this couple comes along, and they see an advertisement for his clinic, and they're like, oh my God, maybe we could raise the brother with no dick as a girl. That was their genuine thought, because they didn't know what to do.
Right.
So they contacted John Money, and John Money was like, yes, you can, based on his theory, right? Now, his theory at that point had no study associated to it. It was just a theory. There was no study done. There was no research point. So in his mind, he was like, oh my God, I have an opportunity to actually prove whether my theory is right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so they agree to go through it. They obviously make some modifications to the balls, and then, raise him as a girl and the other brother as a boy. They change his name to a girl name. I think it was Jenny, maybe. It was like from Jim to Jenny. It was something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, they raise him as a girl and the other as a boy.
Right.
And they continue to go back, as they grow up, they go back to checkups once a year with John Money and blah, blah, blah. Later on, a lot of crazy stuff was found out, but essentially those the boy who was being raised as a girl started to develop masculine traits despite the fact that he was being raised as a girl. So
were you on estrogen blocker or testosterone blockers or estrogen or anything?
No.
Okay. So it was purely social, like purely
a social.
Okay, got
social change.
Got it. So he's still gonna get chest hair, and his voice is gonna drop, and he's gonna go through puberty normal. Just without hair.
I believe so. There may have been some lower end drugs involved,
but nothing crazy.
Nothing like what we see today.
It was mostly social.
Yeah,
okay.
It was mostly social because John Money was essentially trying to prove his theory that girls can be raised as boys, boys can be raised as girls.
This is a gender thing, not a trans thing.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
It's now trying to say that like gender. He founded the idea of gender.
Got it.
And he said gender exists.
Okay.
Because males can be raised as women and females can be raised as men.
Okay, so right. Jenna is in high school and
gender is a social construct because it's only exists because of how we raise them. And if we raise them as one thing, even though they're born as a man, if we raise them as a woman, they can be a woman. And therefore gender is different than sex. That was his whole discrepancy.
Yeah, I'm
right. And so what's interesting is that I remember the name. It was Ben and Brenda. The boy's original name was Ben, and then it changed to Brenda.
Okay, so Brenda starts getting chest hair.
No, Brenda started exhibiting signs that she was more like a guy, right? So she would like to do a lot of outdoor sports and activities. Always preferred going to the bathroom standing up, like if he had piss or whatever. Always preferred standing up rather than sitting down, which is kind of interesting little tidbit. Stuff like that, right? And then additionally it came, and so they were going through this whole thing. And by the time they're around 14, I think, actually, the two boys, Brenda, the girl, and the brother were like, we don't want to go to this fucking John Money anymore. We don't like this guy, right? And later on, it came out that John Money was actually not really analyzing there at the clinic. He was actually having them perform sexual acts on each other and stripping down naked and like laying on top of one another and touching one another, like weird shit like that. Really creepy shit.
Gross.
Yeah. So that came out later on.
He wasn't chemically castrated like he recommended all other men to be.
Yeah.
Fuck him.
But anyways, by the time these boys, after 14 years, had started being like, no, we don't want to go to this fucking clinic anymore. John Money had already published papers saying that he had evidence to prove that his theory was correct. And these papers and studies were pushed into universities going into the 80s to essentially say like, oh my God, gender is really a real concept, because gender wasn't even a thing until the 60s, until he formulated it.
Right. Even though Brenda was like exhibiting masculine traits,
Because Brenda wasn't the one actually talking about these studies, right? John Money was releasing these studies and just kind of Brenda and Bruce, I believe, were the two brothers.
Right, but his whole thing is that like if the Brenda is raised as a girl, then they'll present femininely, but you're saying that they were presenting masculinely.
Right, but John Money was disguising that.
So he was
fraudulating it. Right?
Okay, got it.
Despite the fact that there were masculine traits being present in Brenda, John Money fraudulated. That's not a fucking word.
I understand.
You get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah. He fudged the numbers.
He fudged the numbers in order to make it appear as though his theory was being proved by this singular case study.
Right.
It's important to note that gender as a concept never existed until John Money came around, never existed until he formulated this theory, and then he proved this theory based on one fraudulent case study that he fabricated and then pushed through peer-reviewed papers into mainstream media and into colleges to be taught as gender is different than sex. It was a very important like chain there, right? And so he pushes this into universities. It starts being taught in universities that gender is different than sex and blah, 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 right? And then a few years later, Brenda finds out that, they were originally born a boy and, this is what happened, blah, blah, blah. And so they completely shift their life. They go back to being named Ben or whatever it was. And they're like, oh, I always felt as though I was in the wrong body. Like I always felt like something is off. I didn't understand it, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Right. And so, but at that point, it had already been about 5-ish years that John Money had been, or more, that John Money had been pushing this stuff to universities. So by the time that Brenda came out and was like, hey, like this study was actually fraudulent, John Money was totally wrong in his analysis. He only had one case study. This is not true. This is not who I am. This was not a successful test. I did not work. I don't know why he's saying this. Like there are video recordings of him. And actually he died from his complications a few years later after that point, just from the complications of the surgeries and stuff like that. It just wasn't, it's not the same as it is today.
Right.
And I think there were some drugs involved as well later on. But
I can imagine.
Anyways, he passed away. But at that point, we don't have like social media and, obviously there was news, but not the transition, not the spread of information like it is today, right? And so despite the fact that he was saying these few things, he ended up dying a few years later, and John Money had already pushed, with all the money generated from his clinic, all of these fraudulated studies under the radar into these universities to teach gender studies.
So now it's becoming fact even though it's not.
Right. Now it's becoming fact. And so he, the damage was already done.
Right.
And so then, Brenda passes away. And then later on in his life, in the early 2000s, he starts getting sued for these fraudulent studies. John Money starts getting sued for these fraudulent studies. John Money ends up passing away at some point after that, I think in the early 2000s, somewhere around like 2005, 2006.
Got it.
He never apologized for fraudulating, pushing that fraudulent data. There was an overwhelming evidence that it was fraudulent and he was taken to court over it. But at that point, it had already been 20 years of colleges teaching this. And that is fundamentally why we still have a distinction between gender and sex. Gender and sex was never distinguished before John Money came along and pushed that through.
Right.
Prior to that, colleges, gender wasn't even a thing.
Right.
It didn't exist because sex was the defining characteristic of whatever gender you were, right?
Right.
And so it's just really interesting where gender came from and what the origins were and why it exists today.
Well,
My explanation of it, although is accurate, is also diluted from the individual points of fact.
yeah. It's interesting because he took the route that we spoke about at the beginning of the podcast, where it's like college makes you think like this is the way it is because it's the way that it's done, and it doesn't it's not open to interpretation for new ideas. He had a new idea. The problem was the only way to prove it was to basically force gender dysphoria onto a fucking kid, which is fucked up, right?
Well, he was a real fucked up dude. I mean,
Yeah,
looking at his book and his ideology that men should be castrated and all men are terrible just because his stepfather was abusive to him. I mean, he was just a fucked up guy.
he probably had some kind of dysphoria.
Oh, of course.
But like, I think that the idea of gender separate from sex makes sense, especially because you can have gender dysphoria or you can like be gay, right? Like it makes sense that it's a separate idea, but you can't fucking act on it. And then you can't say without any backing that it's like a not dysphoria. You know what I mean? Like gender dysphoria is it a disease? Is that the right name for it?
It's a condition.
It's a condition, sure, right. But he wasn't saying that it was a condition. He was basically saying that it was a social construct.
Yeah.
It's not. It's a condition. If you don't feel the way that you are, right?
Yeah.
If your sex and gender don't align, then you have gender dysphoria. Not,
So just really interesting stuff and interesting origins of that. But what's even all getting back to our original
think they
point.
teach that in gender studies?
Getting back to our original point, there have been a lot of students interviewed who took gender studies who are interviewed like, oh, do you know who John Money is? Do you know about the origins of gender? And they don't.
What the fuck do you teach in gender studies?
And that's why I've chosen to pick on gender studies this entire podcast.
Dude, I'm
because
totally
I think
down.
that there is a complete, in that specific department, I know of a complete lack of education and genuine critical thinking and thought on top of a very low ROI degree.
Yeah. I think that it's a great example of a degree that you can get if you're interested in that stuff. Like this story was interesting.
Right.
I might be interested in getting a degree in gender studies later on because it's a captivating subject.
Gender studies doesn't even teach that.
But the thing is, like, I'm not going to be like, I don't have the degree now because I don't have the money to pay for it because no one's going to pay me to know this shit.
Yeah.
Right. Like, you can go through an entire gender studies degree and pay $80,000 for a college degree. And at the end of it, you're going to lose to a debate to Sander who watched a YouTube video and then talked about it on a podcast.
Well, that's a lot of the Charlie Kirk situations too, where it's like, Charlie Kirk will read up on something and the students don't even know about it, even if that might be their degree, But I think ultimately that comes down to like, there's a lot of students that these get degrees and that's their motto,
Yeah. But also the Charlie Kirk stuff fucking sucks because he'll go to a kid who's like a sophomore in college and then he'll start whipping his cock out with like facts and shit that he read from a specific study that they're not going to learn about for 2 more years and be like, well, your degree's not doing anything for you because you don't know this. And they're like, well, I fucking haven't learned it yet, right? Or even if they're a recent graduate, he might be cherry picking something that like, these are big fields. Like there are 5 million engineering studies that I could bring up that neither of us know about because you only have 4 years to learn all of fucking engineering.
Yeah.
And 2 of them are only spent doing mechanical. The rest is English 1 and gender studies. So like you can cherry pick those things. And that's what bothers me about a lot of Charlie Kirk and Ben Shapiro's things is that they'll cherry pick.
Yeah. To be fair to them though, I have seen a lot of when like Charlie Kirk will ask a philosophy major to tell him about like Mill or Kant or, Nietzsche, like big philosophers.
Got it.
And they'll like stumble through like a handful of facts.
Right.
And like, that's really shocking. It's like, you got a degree. Like I could tell you more about Nietzsche than that. And I don't even have a tenth of a degree in fucking philosophy.
But at the same time, how much can you tell me about Bernoulli? Can you tell me his first name?
No.
Me neither. Can you tell me what Bernoulli's equation does? Because I barely remember.
Yeah, it's the fluid equation for undefined fluid flow.
Right. Do you know what his second and third equations were?
Fuck.
Me neither. Right.
Yeah.
So it's like Charlie Kirk could just like he could chat GPT Bernoulli for 15 minutes, come in and school the shit out of us and say that our degrees don't mean anything, but it's cherry picking. Right. In some cases, I think that
there's give and take on either side is the point I'm making.
Yeah. Yeah. In some cases, I think he makes a good point. But I think one of the reasons that I like Joe Rogan style interviews more than those type of confrontational interviews is because Joe Rogan also has no formal education and doesn't know anything. He's open to like receiving new thoughts and ideas and stuff. It's less of a gotcha thing and more of another one because it's also like, I can't talk to Bernoulli's equation right now But that's not what I got from my engineering degree. What I got from my engineering degree was an understanding. So like the other day, we were having a presentation on stealth at work. So it was like a very high level, like, what is stealth? Like the F-117 stealth fighter and like the Black Hawk helicopters and stuff, like what is stealth? And they had some equations up there, and there was an equation, a breakdown of what the variables were, and then a picture. And when the guy brought the slide up, he was like, okay, fuck the equation. We're just going to look at the pretty pictures because that's what I know. And I was like, dog, you're an engineer. And so I started asking him about the variables because I can read that equation. And like, I'm curious what each of these variables means because I know each variable has an equation behind it too. That's what engineering gave me, was the ability to read and understand those equations. And he's so far out of it that he doesn't remember it anymore, but like, that's what I went to college for. But you can't whip that out on Charlie Kirk in the middle. Like you can give Charlie Kirk a fucking like an integral equation and he won't know how to read it. Right. Like this equation had a limit it as whatever, X approaches infinity in it. And like, he wouldn't know how to read that. Right.
Yeah.
But anyways, no need to get a degree in gender studies because you listen to the Vision 79 podcast and Sanders got you hooked up. So that's fucking crazy though, dude. I didn't know about that.
That's wild.
We should do an entire podcast on like gender stuff.
I've heard it nonchalantly in a Michael Knowles podcast. Like it was a very brief rundown of the history.
Yeah.
And I listened to it and I was like, this cannot be fucking true. This is so fucking crazy. This is like insane.
Yeah.
And then I looked into it and then I watched the interviews of Bruce going on ABC News after these studies talking about it. I watched interviews of him talking about it just before he passed away and talking about what John Money did to him.
Right.
And then I looked into these studies and what John Money did and the clinic, and I watched other people's, history go-throughs on this stuff. And I was like, oh shit, like this is fucking real people with real shit. It was fucking shocking.
Every couple episodes, we should have a segment that's called like Sanders Sandbox, and it goes over whatever like tweak session we're going through at the time. Like whatever stuff you're learning about. I think that'd be fun.
It would be.
But yeah, after the Fat podcast the other week, I was like, man, it would be so interesting to have a guest on and talk about this topic. So like, let's say we do our Fat podcast and establish what our thoughts are. And then right afterward, we have an interview with a fat person and talk them through our concept and hear about like, what are their thoughts on our thoughts, and can we have a conversation about it and understand? And it'd be awesome to do something similar with someone who has gender dysphoria or supports like, that same logic of thinking that John Money supports. And like, not like a gotcha thing, but more of like I want to understand you better kind of thing. I think that would be cool.
Yeah.
But in any case, it'd be cool to do an entire gender podcast, even though it sounds like we just kind of did it. But
there's a lot more to say too.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't even say anything. I didn't talk about it at all.
True. And I just take a small snippet of like the wide range that I've looked at. So
yeah. Anyways, okay. So I have a dial-in quote for today to wrap it up. I really fucking struggled to find one today. Because generally speaking, I don't have a lot of quotes on education or college or things like that. I have found some really cool quotes lately, but none of them have anything to do with this, but I'm hoping to use them in future podcasts. But the one I have today, I kind of took it from the angle of, I think the main reason that college sucks is because you are not informed as to what college actually is and what its function is while you're in it. You don't know until you're out of it looking back. And by then it's too late. By then you're drowning in loans. By then you have a degree you're unhappy with. By then you're whatever. And you can go talk to these kids about it, but they don't understand because they are too close to the forest to see the trees, right?
Yeah.
They're still in the cave. They're still looking at shadows on the wall, right? And so now you're coming back and you're like, hey, these flowers and foxes are real. And they don't know what you're talking about, right? They think you're crazy. But my quote this week, I don't remember where it came from, but it's the best way to keep a prisoner from escaping is to make sure he never knows he's in prison, which speaks to the ignorance while you're in there.
Yeah.
Right. And unfortunately, eventually you figure it out either by dropping out or by graduating. But either way, usually the damage is already done.
Yeah. In this podcast, I thought a lot about the Another Brick in the Wall music video.
I don't know the music video. I know the song, but I didn't.
Yeah, there's a music video and it's all like school children that look exactly the same walking down conveyor belts into like meat grinders or like in formation. It's a really weird video, but it's like very like systematic, kind of mind-numbing, you are the system kind of video. And I thought of that in this podcast, but
I don't have exactly that view of it, but it's more of like a...
I don't either, but it's kind of like a juxtaposition against like the reality that I see that's interesting to think about.
It's kind of like there was once a girl who was kidnapped. She was like at a bus stop and she got taken really young.
Mm.
And she grew up for like 13 years in this dude's basement. And there was one little window in the top of the wall, but she couldn't see out of it really. So she didn't know there was an outside. She just thought that there was the room and then a light. That's all she knew.
Okay.
So when she saw the outside for the first time, she was like, she flabbergasted because she didn't know that there was an outside.
Yeah.
And it sucks because when you're in there, you don't really know what the outside is like, and you don't even really know that it's there, right? Like you don't know what your other routes are, or how much debt you're going to be hit with, or like, if your degree is going to work out or not, right? Even
Right.
people getting STEM degrees right now might be replaced by DeepSeek next month. Could you imagine being a junior in college right now going, oh, fuck, all the jobs I'm going to apply for next year might not exist? That would suck. Anyways, thanks for listening. That's our podcast.
Have a good week.